So obviously a lot of people have been talking about these WWE releases recently, specifically the ones that happened yesterday. Of course, if you're not aware, yesterday WWE announced the releases of former Universal Champion Braun Strowman, Aleister Black, Buddy Murphy, Lana, Riott and Santana Garrett. These are just the latest names and just the latest as part of WWE's budget cuts when it comes to talents on the roster, senior executives, people in charge of WWE's offices in the likes of Japan, India, the United Kingdom, Los Angeles, WWE Digital, WWE Studios. There is a lot going on right now in the WWE corporate structure and talent roster too. There have been a lot of budget cuts, spring cleaning, COVID cuts, whatever you want to call them, and yesterday's releases are just the latest example of this. But obviously, when it comes to these talents, specifically some of the bigger and more surprising names on this list, everyone now that the dust is starting to settle, is saying, well, where do these guys go next? Because obviously, when any talent is released by WWE, options such as AEW, Impact Wrestling, Ring of Honor, New Japan Pro Wrestling, Mexico, AAA, CMLL, all of these companies, All Japan Pro Wrestling, all of these companies start to emerge as possible destinations for these talents. So what I thought I would do today is take a look at these talents individually and suggest or predict where these talents are going to go in the future. Because it was reported previously, when you talk about Impact Wrestling specifically, I don't know so much so about AEW or Ring of Honor or New Japan Pro Wrestling, but specifically when it came to Impact, we had already heard that Impact Wrestling had already reached out to some of the talent that was released by WWE in April. If you want to rewind it back even further, last year, when you had the budget cuts and releases of the talent in 2020, it was reported that Impact Wrestling had reached out to the likes of the Good Brothers within 15 minutes, just 15 minutes after they were released officially by WWE. Impact Wrestling was picking up the phone or sending messages to Carl Anderson and Doc Gallows. Fast forward to July, they're part of the Impact Wrestling roster and have signed 2-year contracts. So who's to say that AEW or an Impact Wrestling or a Ring of Honor or a New Japan Pro Wrestling or whoever hasn't already reached out to some of the talent released yesterday? So what I think I will do is break down the options, break down the likely destinations, and in my opinion, where I think the best outcome for these talents to land will be. So let's kick off. Let's talk about arguably one of the most surprising names. That would be Braun Strowman. Now, Braun Strowman, of course, former Universal Champion, former Intercontinental Champion, former Raw Tag Team Champion on 2 occasions, former Money in the Bank winner, former Greatest Royal Rumble winner, former Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royale winner. This is a guy that was a big, big deal in WWE. Now, certainly there's a lot to be discussed when it comes to his booking and arguably the mismanagement of his booking in WWE. I've been very vocal about that myself. I think a lot of people have. In my opinion, Braun Strowman's biggest opportunity to become a big deal or a megastar. He was always a big deal. I mean, he's a former world champion, but to become a real big face of the company, face of a brand, opportunity was in 2017, late 2016, 2017. Now, of course, Braun Strowman, he made his main roster debut for WWE in 2015. The night after SummerSlam, he was revealed as the latest member of the Wyatt family, the black sheep of the Wyatt family, joined the likes of Bray Wyatt, Luke Harper, and Eric Rowan. And he had success there. Didn't really have that many matches because he was very, very green. Very green. At the time in which he made his main roster debut for WWE, he had something like 2 matches ever inside of a professional wrestling ring. Had some training in NXT, not a lot. And reportedly, Vince McMahon took a look at Braun Strowman when he was a rosebud for Adam Rose and said, why aren't we doing something with that guy? Look at the size of him. Look at his background. We need to be doing something with that guy. They put him on the main roster way too early. And I saw a tweet, I think it was by David Bixenspan last night, and it's a great point. It encapsulates everything when it comes to Braun Strowman. I probably won't do it justice, but I'm not saying this verbatim. But essentially it was the point of you put this guy on the main roster where he's arguably one of the worst wrestlers under contract, yet he somehow manages to win the race and seeing if he can keep up, becomes one of the most over talents on the roster, becomes one of the better big men workers, specifically in WWE recent history, but arguably of all time in terms of a big guy on WWE's roster, gets over, and once he gets over and gets to a point where he can make the WWE money, they release him. You know, it's bizarre. The Braun Strowman story is so bizarre, and it's one of WWE, in my opinion, one of WWE's biggest mismanagements in recent history. This was a guy, as I mentioned, in 2017 and into 2018, this was a guy that was super, super over. He was a dominating heel, and look, we have seen millions of them over the years in WWE as someone that comes in, has a good look, has size, They try and market this guy. They're trying to get him over. They try and have him squash all of these people, and he did. But it worked because he was popular. He had something about him. He had a bit of charisma. When it came to real time to get over, when it came to talking on the microphone or whatever, the guy had charisma. He did have something about him. He does have something about him. And in 2017, this was a guy that was so popular, they had to turn him babyface. Every time his music would hit, the big roar at the start of his entrance music, people would go wild. People would stand on their feet. People would react. You know, pro wrestling is about energy. It's about emotion. And he would generate emotion from the audience in a time when it's very difficult to do that. So he got over, and people are saying, man, this guy is so over. He's so popular. We haven't seen really anything like him in a long, long time in terms of a big guy. He ticks every single box for Vince McMahon. Now, reportedly, there might have been issues maybe about conduct backstage or professionalism backstage, all that kind of stuff, but it didn't matter. This was a guy that was over. Fans liked him. Fans reacted to him. You know, he moved the dial a little bit in terms of ratings. He certainly sold a lot of merchandise. He was a marketable character, and Vince McMahon loved him. And Braun Strowman loved Vince McMahon, and he loved WWE. And he signed a big contract in 2019, but prior to that, they had the opportunity to get him over, and they didn't. They didn't do it. They missed the opportunity. They had this guy lose something like 4 or 5 consecutive big Universal Championship opportunities that involve Brock Lesnar, whether it's No Mercy in 2017, whether it was SummerSlam the prior month in the Fatal 4-Way match, whether it's a triple threat match involving Lesnar and Kane at the Royal Rumble, whether it's Brock Lesnar versus Braun Strowman at Crown Jewel in 2018, and during that period of time, Brock Lesnar beat him in a matter of seconds. And that matters. That kind of stuff matters. Because in any form, and when you're trying to establish any talent, regardless if they're big, small, underdog, dominating monster, whatever, when it comes to those first few big matches, they need to win. They need to win, and they need to win, and they need to win. If you're going to establish a big star, they need to win. Certainly, if you're someone like Braun Strowman, that's nearly 7 foot tall, over 300 pounds, close to 400 pounds, but certainly as he got in better shape, he was closer to 300. You can't have this guy lose over and over and over again, because if you're a casual fan, or even if you're a smart fan, whatever kind of fan you are, you look at this guy and say, I know what's going to happen when he challenges for the Universal Championship. He's going to lose. And in your mind, you already do the maths, if you will, the mental arithmetic, and you look at it and you say, wait a minute, against a guy like against a Brock Lesnar, he's going to lose. And he did. He lost over and over and over and over again. And in your mind, you go, he's not as valuable of a commodity as a Brock Lesnar. And people can laugh at that now and go, well, of course he wasn't going to be as valuable of a commodity as Brock Lesnar. But you never know. WWE never gave him the opportunity to get there, because every time it felt like he was just going to get there, what do? Right from underneath him, they cut his legs away from him. And that's the problem with Braun Strowman. He is the best example I can think of, certainly in recent history, of a guy that you had there was a moment in time with him. There was a moment in time where he was over, where he could have been something, and they didn't capitalize on it. And the idea of, it's all about the big picture. It's all about the long picture. Braun Strowman himself spoke about this in certain interviews. It's about the big picture. Vince McMahon would try and settle him down. Every time Braun Strowman threatened to quit or leave WWE, Vince McMahon would say, just think, we've got big plans for you. It's about the bigger picture. Think about the bigger picture, Braun. There was no bigger picture. There is no bigger picture. We've seen that the magical Wizard of Oz is just a guy behind a curtain. There is no big picture anymore, and there wasn't for Braun Strowman. If there was, he would still be with the company today. So as far as where next for Braun Strowman? Where is he going to go next? Well, it's a good question. Mick Foley did a very interesting tweet speaking about this, and I think it's a very good point. When it comes to Braun Strowman, Braun's been very open when it comes to where does he think he's going to go in the future? Where does his future lie in the world of professional wrestling? Because, of course, Braun Strowman has always come across, I think for most people, as a company guy, as a WWE guy. I don't think anyone probably ever thought we would see Braun Strowman compete in a ring that wasn't a WWE ring. I think most people thought, you know what, Braun Strowman, he's a Vince McMahon guy. He's loyal to Vince McMahon. He's loyal to WWE. He's a guy that WWE put a lot of time and money into. And to be honest, the idea of Braun competing for an AEW or a New Japan Pro Wrestling or an Impact Wrestling just felt like it would never happen. But now, look, things change. He's no longer under contract to WWE. And as is the case of all of these guys that were released yesterday, they have a 90-day non-compete clause, as is the case for anyone when they're released from their WWE contract. What's interesting, of course, with that is that the 90 days expires about 3 days before All Out, which is September 5th, I think, this year. It's about 3 days before that. That's when their 90-day non-compete clause expires. So does that mean Braun Strowman could go to an AEW? Could he go to an Impact Wrestling? Could he go to a New Japan? Personally, Braun Strowman's a really interesting one and a difficult one to predict, in my opinion. The reason I say that is because I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest, if Braun Strowman never actually wrestled for another company again. I really wouldn't be surprised. Now, do I think that's going to be the case? No, I don't. But he is the type of guy that is loyal. He is the kind of guy that, he was on a good deal in WWE. Reportedly, that was part of the reason for WWE cutting him loose, was more so a case of he was on something like reported to be like $1 million per year, possibly more than that. And WWE looked at it and said that's not financially viable anymore. And that was part of the reason for his departure. Now, is he going to get that kind of deal in Impact Wrestling? I don't think so. Is he going to get that kind of deal in New Japan? Certainly not in the landscape and the market of currently in the pandemic world that we're living in right now. AEW, could he get $1 million a year? I mean, AEW could afford it. Whether they see the same value in that, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a situation where Braun Strowman returns to WWE in 6 months on a lesser contract because they've worked things out. There's a return to touring. There's obviously going to be, more financially viable contracts available for them at that point. They might have even been sold at that point. Who knows what the situation is with WWE at this point. So as to where next, I think he would do very good business for AEW. I know some people aren't fans of Braun Strowman. Certainly they're not fans of the stuff he was saying last year during the early days of the pandemic about independent wrestlers. But look, this is a guy that I think if he went to AEW, he would be very successful. And could he move the needle for them? Why not? I mean, this is a guy that was popular on Raw and SmackDown. He was over. Can he ever get back to that level of being over again? I don't know. Maybe a different environment is what he needs. Maybe a different presentation is what he needs. Braun Strowman in AEW is a really interesting scenario because it doesn't kind of feel like he fits that style or he fits that landscape, but maybe that's the good thing, is that he doesn't fit that landscape. He doesn't fit that environment. Maybe having a bit of an outsider and looks a bit differently, who's only ever known WWE. Got to remember, this is a star that was trained by WWE. He was recruited by WWE from a powerlifting, a strongman background, and has only ever known the WWE style. He's never worked indies. He's never done anything like that. So him stepping out into this world outside of WWE is kind of like in the Truman Show, isn't it, at the end, when he escapes the bubble and goes somewhere else. It's just, the options for Braun Strowman are really fascinating to me. If I could see him going anywhere, it would be AEW. But frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if he is a guy in, say, 6 months' time or a year's time, goes back to WWE under a different contract when things have changed slightly. I don't know. If I had to pick one now, I would say AEW. But Braun Strowman's a difficult one to predict. Moving on, another name, Aleister Black. Now, obviously, this one was surprising for different reasons. If Aleister Black was released by WWE in April of this year, nobody would be surprised that Aleister Black was released. He hadn't been on TV in about 6 months. Obviously, there were still question marks about his future after the release of his wife, Zelina Vega, back in October last year due to her clashing with WWE management over the third-party edicts in WWE handed down by Vince McMahon. And nobody would have been surprised because there had been rumors and reports that Aleister Black hadn't even been backstage at TV for a long time. And he hadn't been seen or heard of for a long time. So everyone thought, well, when those cuts came in April, people thought, well, maybe Aleister Black, that's a logical person to be released. Well, there was reports and rumors after WrestleMania that turned out to be factually accurate in that they had plans for him to return to television. They filmed all of these vignettes and they spent time hyping his return to SmackDown. And those vignettes took a lot of time to make, by the way. We're talking significant production in terms of lighting, candles, animation, props, Tales of the Dark Father, significant character change and storylines and all that kind of stuff. They had plans for him. So they do these vignettes. He returns to SmackDown 2 weeks ago in a show-closing segment on SmackDown on Fox, the most viewed show that WWE has right now on network television. And 2 weeks later, he's gone. Part of these budget cuts, he's gone. So that's why it was surprising. Now, as far as options to him now, I think that AEW, Impact, New Japan, and Ring of Honor, they're all options for him. If I had to say where I think he will go, I would probably say AEW. He fits the AEW style. He fits the AEW creative freedom. He certainly would have a contract. Make no mistake, I think people like Impact Wrestling. I think, prior to the pandemic, maybe even New Japan could have been an option for him in terms of finances. I think Impact, when I say Impact Wrestling, and I am going to say Impact for a couple of these names, because I did this video similarly before with the names that were released in April, and I said Impact for quite a few of those names, and people said, you're just an Impact Wrestling mark, or you're just an Impact Wrestling fan. Impact's a tiny company. They have no money. That's not true. They may be smaller, obviously, than AEW. Certainly, the platform that they operate on in terms of Access TV doesn't nowhere near have the reach of a TNT or a TBS or anything like that, and they don't have the finances of Tony Khan and having Warner Media behind them and all that kind of stuff, and the Khan family. They're billionaires. But Impact does have substantial money. They're owned by Anthem Sports and Entertainment. There's a reason why Impact Wrestling was able to sign, say, the Good Brothers last year and put them onto financially lucrative contracts. So who's to say they couldn't do that for an Aleister Black or someone like that? Now, as far as Aleister Black, personally, I think he's likely to go to AEW. As I mentioned, in terms of the style of wrestling there, the style of presentation there, the creative freedom. And to be honest, when it comes to creative freedom, Aleister Black's actually been quite vocal. Tommy N's been quite vocal about that. It's that creative freedom isn't the be-all and end-all of him. If anything, he kind of likes boundaries, and he likes rules, and he likes parameters. Sometimes that's when the best creativity actually sparks, is when you're told, look, these are the parameters you have to work in. Now, if he went to AEW, he wouldn't be in this creatively, totally free environment. There are still limits to what they can do. Tony Khan is still the boss. Tony Khan is still the booker, and Tony Khan has the end call. Certainly, he's going to be more part of the creative process, but he would be part of the creative process wherever he goes. I think Aleister Black is inevitable, frankly, to end up in AEW. I think if he goes to AEW, he'll have some kind of a deal where he's allowed to work dates in New Japan once everything opens up, in the same vein that Chris Jericho, Jon Moxley, etc., Kenny Omega, all of those names have those clauses in their contract. But when you start to think of Aleister Black versus Kenny Omega, that's an unbelievable match right there. When you think of Aleister Black versus Pac, versus Jon Moxley, versus, I mean, the list can go on, Chris Jericho, Cody Rhodes, Darby Allin. Think of the dark dystopian things we could see between Aleister Black and Darby Allin. I mean, that's incredibly exciting. You know that Darby, especially with the Sting mentorship, but even prior to when he was being paired with Sting, they have this almost cinematic and dark element to them when they're doing the black and white films, and Darby Allin's in the body bags and he's got these masks on, and he does these kind of indie films before some of his matches, or indie promos, sort of short films before his matches, or on Dynamite. Think of where they could go with Darby Allin and Aleister Black. Think of the universe that they could spin off to with Darby Allin and Aleister Black. In terms of the characters, in terms of being dark, different, unique, as I mentioned, dystopian, think of what we could see on AEW, having the promos, the productions between Aleister Black and Darby Allin, and having Sting in the middle of there, just sprinkle on a little bit of gold dust with Sting. That could be fascinating. That could be really interesting, and that is really exciting to me. So given all of those factors in there, plus the matches, as I mentioned, he could have with a Kenny Omega, Chris Jericho, Jon Moxley, Cody Rhodes. I mean, the list goes on and on, really, of the top stars that they have there. Miro. I think, for me, Aleister Black versus Darby Allin is something that I really want to see involving Sting. The possibilities really there are endless. So I expect Aleister Black to go to AEW. I really wouldn't be surprised if that's the destination. Murphy's an interesting one. Because for me, Murphy can go to AEW, and I do think that's a likely destination for him. I think, though, if Murphy goes to AEW, where's the ceiling? Where's the ceiling for Murphy? Now, there's no doubt in my mind, like I said, if Murphy goes to AEW, he could be a TNT champion. He could be involved in some great matches against, again, a Darby Allin, a Miro. The list can go on and on of the great names of Cody Rhodes, even Kenny Omega. Talk about two guys that use knee strikes for days. Pac, even someone like Orange Cassidy. And he could be, for me, I see Murphy as someone coming in. He'd be like an excellent person to put in Team Taz or someone like that. I could definitely see someone like that, and I could see Murphy having his position on the roster and being fine. For me, though, there are other options, because I can see Murphy going into an Impact Wrestling and being an Impact World Champion in that environment. And I've mentioned this time and time again when it comes to WWE releases, because unfortunately there have been a lot of them over the course of the last 12 months or so, in that you do have to look at what are you trying to achieve when you leave WWE? Obviously, when you leave WWE, you've got this name recognition, you've got this buzz about you, but your next move is kind of crucial. Look at Matt Cardona, for instance. He went to AEW for something like, was it 6 weeks? Or he went for 6 matches, something like that. Now he's in Impact, and he kind of feels a little bit lost in the shuffle, and I don't know if he really made the most of that post-WWE aura that you have. You look at someone like Eric Young, who was coming out of WWE with no momentum at all. Hadn't been on TV at all. If he was just in squash matches, main event matches. Nobody really cared, frankly, about what Eric Young was doing at that point. He came back to Impact, made an impact, pun intended, so quickly and so monumental. His heel character was so over. They gave him the Impact World Championship. They changed plans. He was in this hot feud with Rich Swann that resulted in him main eventing Bound for Glory as the Impact World Champion. Now, I think Murphy has more about him in terms of momentum, even though he hasn't been on TV, but he's younger and he's got this kind of aura about him that he could go to AEW and do well. But I think the difference there might be that if he goes to say, an Impact, then he can be in the main event. He can be a world champion. And I say this quite a few times, that say you go to Impact, say you sign a 2-year deal, maybe even 12 months, or maybe even a per appearance deal. Impact are very open about their contracts. If Murphy goes to Impact and signs something like that or does something like that, he can go into that world, he can become Impact World Champion, and then about 12 months, 18 months time, he's suddenly way, way more valuable to AEW because he's also got the WWE element about him, but he's also got a guy that's had great success, was proven to have great success outside of WWE. It's the Cody Rhodes effect. Sometimes Cody Rhodes, I know it's difficult to do right now because of the indies, although the indies are opening back up. When Cody Rhodes left WWE, what did he do? He did the tour of the indies, go to all of these companies, work these different styles, touch these different audience points, give yourself a bit of momentum, give yourself a name, prove yourself. And maybe that's what someone like Buddy Murphy does. So whilst I think AEW maybe is a destination for him, I think he should consider maybe an Impact or a Ring of Honor or something like that. So wouldn't rule out that one. Murphy's a bit more of a different one. Lana, I mean, I'm not going to spend too long on Lana because I think it's relatively obvious if she was going to go to a company where she would go. Obviously, Miro's in AEW. He's the TNT champion. I think most people expect Lana to go to AEW if she goes to another pro wrestling company. I say if because, look, one of the real endearing things about Lana is that, first of all, some of the storylines she was placing in WWE were horrific, and that's not her fault. Whether it's the Dolph Ziggler-Rusev situation or the Bobby Lashley-Rusev situation or whatever it is, she did the best that she could. And one of the most endearing things about Lana was her ability and desire to try and get better. Look at the WWE documentaries they've done about her on the network. She tried to get better. She embraced the sport of professional wrestling. She embraced working in the ring. She embraced trying to get so much better. And she really did. She tried to get better, and she did. And I think the audience grew to respect that from her, that she had a desire to get better. She eventually, considering the heat that she had, she won the audience over by trying to get better and improving as a wrestler and showing dedication and respect to the industry. So I think if she did go to an AEW, I don't think people would have a problem with that. One, because, again, she respects the industry, but two, the pairing of her and Miro was really what everyone always wanted to see. People always wanted to see Lana with Rusev, and people would still want to see Lana, or whatever she would go by, CJ, with Miro in AEW, because that's the pair that everyone likes. They are real-life husband and wife. They do have chemistry. They do bounce off each other, and it's real. And people like that. People like that. People like that as a pairing. Now, I say if because Lana doesn't need pro wrestling. Lana did very, very well on social media while she was with WWE. She was being paid a lot of money to do advertisements on Instagram, which she eventually got in trouble for. She can carry on doing that. She was in television and some, low-budget movies. Who's to say she won't go back to doing that as well? So maybe for her, pro wrestling, it might not be for her. But on the same vein, maybe she goes to AEW and is part of the Miro character. The Miro character right now is the most relevant it's ever been in AEW. That's not to say it can't be improved. Now, Miro doesn't need a mouthpiece. But, Lana wouldn't necessarily be a mouthpiece, I don't think, for Miro at this point. They would just be a package. They would be a connection. Now, who's to say, of course, Kip Sabian, Miro put him out of action. He's just had surgery. He's got Penelope Ford in his corner. Who's to say you don't do a rivalry with Miro and Lana against Penelope Ford and Kip Sabian? That one writes itself. So for me, Lana for me is a relatively easy one to predict. I would suggest she probably goes to AEW. That's if she goes anywhere at all, because she's got other irons in the fire. So I wouldn't be surprised in that sense. Ruby Riott, this one was just such a shame that she got released by WWE, because the reaction that she got, not just from social media, but from, the wrestlers, and maybe that's the most important thing, is that universally, every single person backstage in WWE has praised Ruby Riott for being a professional, a good person, and really good at what she does. And she never got a fair shake, really. The Riott Squad were a fun faction when there was 3 of them. It's a shame there's only 1 of them now. When they were a tag team on SmackDown, they were greatly overlooked. They've got a women's tag team division, and they were ignoring actual real women's tag teams. It's madness. It's absolute madness. Now, in terms of where does she go, I'll say the same thing I say a lot of times about females that get released by WWE. She could go to AEW. She could go to AEW, and the AEW Women's Division is improving. And I don't say that from a talent point of view, because for me, the AEW Women's Division has always had talent. Maybe it's got a bit better talent now, but it's always had talent there. The biggest issue has always been with AEW's female division, its women's division, has been the presentation of the talent there. We're still working to a point. We're still working to a point where the females are being featured more on the broadcast. We're still working to a point where females should be regularly in the main event and regularly have more than one match on the show and more than one angle, more than one storyline on the show. Now, this past Sunday at Double or Nothing, we had a big featured match in Britt Baker versus Hikaru Shida that went 17 minutes and was a big moment, and Britt Baker's one of the most over characters on the roster. We also had a phenomenal opening match on the buy-in between Serena Deeb and Riho as well. So we're having great female matches on the show. I would like them to be featured more. I would like to have more characters featured on the show from a female point of view, and I would like to have more female storylines on the show from the female point of view. Maybe that becomes easier when you have Rampage on TNT starting in August. I don't know, but I still think there's a ways to go. And what I always say when it comes to female talent that's been released by WWE, obviously AEW is an option, but you have to look at other women's divisions out there. And for me, it goes the WWE women's division up here, which is Raw, SmackDown, and NXT. But then just underneath them, for me, is the Knockouts division in Impact Wrestling. It's the second best women's division, maybe in North America. I don't know, globally, because you have got female-specific companies in Japan, like Stardom, etc. But for me, in North America, the second best women's division is Impact Wrestling. Why? Because of the way the talent is featured, the way the talent is presented. The Knockouts division for Impact Wrestling has been a cornerstone of Impact Wrestling ever since it was created back in, when was it, 2007, 2008. You've got people like Gail Kim actively working behind the scenes, promoting the Knockouts division. You have the Knockouts main eventing shows, sometimes main eventing pay-per-views, main eventing TV specials. You've got a really good, solid roster of talent right there, whether it is Jordan Grace. Deonna Purrazzo, for me, is right up there with one of the best female wrestlers in the world right now. She's just killing it. People like Chelsea Green, I think, are going to come in as well. You've also got a Knockouts tag team division as well. So if you wanted to do maybe a Riott Squad reunion with Sarah Logan, I know she just recently gave birth, so I don't know her time frame for returning, but if they wanted to do something like that, they could go after the Knockouts Tag Team Championships too. So I think there's way more options, there's a better presentation, and there's more opportunity for her in Impact Wrestling. Also, you do have to factor in Ring of Honor, of course. Ring of Honor recently relaunched their women's division, and in the same vein that I mentioned this about Chelsea Green, when she was released, you could go to Impact and do very, very well there, but also it's very desirable to have someone like Ring of Honor courting you and saying, look, if you come in, you'll be the face of our Ring of Honor women's division. We will center this women's division around you. Or being part of a startup is quite interesting, quite alluring. So personally, while she could go to AEW, if me as someone that does a lot of Impact content here on YouTube and someone that watches a lot of Impact Wrestling and watches all kind of wrestling, I do watch AEW, I do watch Impact, I watch Ring of Honor when I can. For me, the best place for Ruby Riott right now is Impact Wrestling. So hopefully they have reached out for her, because I think that's the best place for her. Finally, Santana Garrett. This is a difficult one, and it's an interesting one for her, frankly, because again, she was just bad place, bad time, wrong timing. She got, I guess, called up to the main roster in January. She was part of the Women's Royal Rumble in January. Plans were for her to debut on SmackDown after that, and they got shelved, or they got put on hold. We now know why they got put on hold, because they weren't interested in putting on a new character when they knew these budget cuts were coming. Mark Henry spoke about this when he explained his decision to sign with AEW. He said, look, I reached out to Vince McMahon and was asking about what I was going to do next, and Vince McMahon told me, and this is months ago, budget cuts are coming. And I think they kind of realized, WWE, why are we going to introduce a new character? Why are we going to call someone up like Santana Garrett when we're going to have to release people? And it just made WWE's job easier for them to release someone that wasn't currently involved in anything, even though you'd release the likes of Braun Strowman and Aleister Black too. So for her, I think anything's an option. I could see her going to AEW. I could see her going to Impact. I could see her going to Ring of Honor. The options are open. I don't think any one place is better than the other for her, frankly. I think if she goes into AEW, is she featured on the broadcast that much? Probably not. Probably not. She probably goes on to Dark or Dark Elevation, maybe Rampage. I think the NWA would be an interesting place for her as well. They're trying to build up their women's division as well, certainly with Serena Deeb and the crossover that they have with AEW. That's a possibility. I think if she goes to the NWA as well, for me, it looks likely that when Thunder Rosa's contract with NWA expires, she'll become exclusive to AEW. I know she's doing both at the moment, but I could see Santana Garrett going to NWA. I could see her going to Impact. Like I said, I just don't know how featured she would be. She'd be a positive addition for the Impact division as well. But again, that depends on the influx of talent that looks to be coming in, whether it's Chelsea Green, the Iconics, maybe even Ruby Riott as well. The important thing, and like I mentioned earlier on, when your post-WWE career is not to get lost in the shuffle. She doesn't want to get lost in the shuffle, and maybe if she goes into Impact with lots of names coming in, even though it would be way after them, because they're probably going to be coming in July, this would be coming in around September time, is that really the best place for her? I don't know. If I was going to suggest a place for her to go, I would say Ring of Honor or NWA, because they need names, they need bodies, you'll be more of a featured player there. And like I said, when it regards to either NWA or Ring of Honor, you could be someone where they're going to build the division around you. And that's exciting. So I think maybe that's the best destination for her. But look, guys, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all of these releases by WWE? Where do you think they're going to go next? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community, drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube, get the rankings, and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestling News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.